Awesome. I think we're live. I still cannot see you, Ciprian.
Hello. I think we're on.
I think we are.
Good to see you, Bogdan.
Likewise.
And welcome to Gorgiano's webinar for startups, part of the Grow series. You are now spending most of your time in Silicon Valley, but originally you're from Romania. In fact, from somewhere in the east.
Yeah. I'm originally from the eastern side of Romania. I had a couple of years in the western side in Timișoara, and then I think it's been about 9-10 years ago when I moved to San Francisco.
Right. Well,
yeah, it's been quite a fun ride, so we can chat more about it.
Well, I mean, my feeling was that starting with this, meaning that you're starting out in a place where most people who work in tech are very much engineers and technology focused and so on. But of course, with some interest always in the entrepreneurial side of things. And then I had the pleasure of meeting you and even working with you a little bit in Timișoara. And then your evolution meant that you, having started out as a real techie person, ended up in a very entrepreneurial place. So
Right.
This is something I think maybe worth talking about a little bit in general terms before we go into kind of the questions that we have for today.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I to be honest, I never thought about myself as an entrepreneur. Even nowadays, I think I'm still a technologist at heart. I like to build product, and I think building product is probably the important part that kind of brings me to Moonsense and kind of helps me nowadays kind of build a product in a fraud and risk space. But
Moonsense
yeah, I
being
think
the startup that you founded. Yeah.
I think basically it's really important to kind of do what you love. So what I really like and where I really find enjoyment is in building product. So yeah, like I started my career back in Romania, as you mentioned. In Yash, I used to work for Amazon for a couple of years. Then I moved to Mishora to be one of the first engineers at a small startup. So I can always bounce back in between big tech and startups. And after that, I moved to San Francisco to work for Twitter. I worked for Twitter for about 7 years, both as a software engineer, and then I moved to the engineering management path where I started building teams. I did that for a number of years, worked on a lot of interesting things at Twitter, also in the infrastructure space. So kind of in the belly of the beast where a lot of the interesting scaling problems happened. And then at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, together with kind of a good Romanian friend, Andre, we started Moonsense.
Was this experience at Twitter useful to you as an entrepreneur? Because obviously it was in terms of technical expertise. You just mentioned you did a bunch of really interesting things, great challenges.
Well, I think the relevance is kind of the experience is relevant because you're especially once I moved to an engineering management position, there's a lot of common things in between what you do as an engineering manager and what I do nowadays as at a CDO on a startup. So you need to hire, you need to build teams, you need to manage teams, run teams. You need to kind of be the tiebreaker of a number of kind of technical decisions. So there's a kind of quite a lot of skill set that is common nowadays. Definitely, there's nowadays I'm way closer to the business. Like we need to sell our products, so I am also in front of customers quite a lot, and I am part of the kind of the whole go-to-market motion. But that being said, I think there's still quite a lot of time that I use the same skill sets that I've built at Twitter as an engineering manager, and then kind of towards the end as a kind of manager of managers. So yeah, definitely very useful, and I think the kind of the core engineering management skills are quite useful for building teams, especially on the hiring side. Very, very, very important. Lots of hiring that we've done at Twitter.
Okay, that sounds spot on. You said that your focus continues to be, to a significant extent, the product, and you come from a technical background where the focus was the technical solution and challenges.
Right.
The reason why we build these products, though, is to solve a customer problem, and we'd better do that quickly. We have this title that we're supposed to be talking about, time to value and time to value metrics. Can you explain what those are and how they relate to building products?
Yeah, for sure. So kind of the way that we think about time to value, and I can give a quick intro about what Moonsense does. So we're a fraud and risk solution. We're focused on what we call behavioral data. We basically give access to our customers to do both data and signals for them to better fight fraud. So what is behavioral data is data about how you interact with kind of the customer's application. So how you move your mouse, how you kind of interact with the keyboard, how you hold the phone, how hard you press on the screen. All of this are kind of important data points for anyone that wants to better catch fraud. So what we do is kind of we have a drop-in set of capabilities, a couple of SDKs on different platforms that collect this data and either send it to our backend where we extract signals and we give that to customers, or if you're a large enterprise customer, you can send this to your own backend and kind of do the data management on your own. So that's kind of the product that we build. We operate in this space of enterprise SaaS. So we sell into kind of large enterprises that maybe don't have the resources to build this, or maybe they want to focus more on building product rather than kind of building this kind of fraud detecting capabilities. But they always need to have data science internally, so they can make sense out of this data. So that's kind of for our go-to-market motion, the ICP, the ideal candidate, ideal customer profile is a enterprise that has data science internally, and kind of fraud is top of mind for them. And I think that that's relevant about how we define value. Kind of to get back to your question, is that um, you need to sell into these enterprises, and then they need to integrate, and then they need to start consuming this data, and they need to see value, right? So we're because we're selling infrastructure, we're kind of a few steps removed from the actual kind of place where the customer sees value. And I think this is quite common for a lot of this startups that either sell infrastructure or sell a product that has some sort of integration steps. So when we think about time to value, we think about kind of we start a clock when like we either go into a proof of concept, or when we kind of actually sign a deal, up until you stop kind of the first case of fraud based on Monsense data. And I think that's how we think about this time to value. And we've iterated quite a lot over time in terms of kind of trying to optimize this, and to some extent it is a North Star metric for us, because as fast as people see this, then kind of they actually see the benefit of the product, and this can impact the sales cycle, can impact kind of renewals, can impact how people think about kind of multi-year deals. So there's quite a lot of reason why this is really important.
It makes sense that you would measure it, kind of have a first measure at least in that way. How long until the model proves that it actually works, that it's not just something we have in place and it may never be useful of actual use. But then, are there any additional metrics? When you look further down the line, do you standardize them? Do you adapt to each customer? Would it, even in a conceptual or theoretical sense, would these additional metrics be part of what you would define as time to value?
Sometimes yes. So sometimes, for example, we actually train machine learn models for some of these customers. So we we work with them to integrate also kind of labels. So they tell us when a case of fraud is actually happening, and then we can correlate that with our kind of gathered data. And then once we do this for chunk of their traffic, then we're in a position where we can actually train a model. And then kind of the classical kind of machine learn model metrics like precision and recall and stuff like that kind of falls into place. But in general, like especially in the space of fraud, there's always pressure on the performance of fraud detection, which is quite interesting, because the space in general is very has a number of solutions already in the market. It's very fragmented, and it's quite easy sometimes for customers to kind of rip out a vendor and replace it with another. So performance is always something that you need to care about. You need to kind of quantify in some way. For us, this has in general has always been kind of a chicken and egg problem, because like we know behavioral data is useful. Like the industry knows, there's academic research, there's other players in the market. But in the same time, customers ask, like, how do we know your stuff works? And especially since there's customers in which we sell infrastructure and we sell data. Like we don't necessarily sell kind of fraud decisions. Like for the longest of time, we haven't sold fraud decisions. We just told you, hey, here's the data. It's structured in a way that makes sense. We've cleaned it up. We've put it in a model that you can easily consume. Kind of work through your data science resources on top of it, and start making sense. And here's some guidelines, and kind of we have some sort of customer success function that we help them navigate through this. But at the end of the day, you always need to kind of build some sort of metric or some sort of proof that your solution actually works. And that's why, for example, we started with selling into large enterprises, and then kind of we moved more and more kind of down the market to and kind of try to distill the product to be able to also address needs of smaller customers, that required us to actually build our own kind of models and our own signals in order to give them something they can consume. And they don't necessarily have a lot of data science resources. So I think this kind of back to time to value, it's important to think about also about performance in general. Like, how can you prove through a metric that your solution actually works well? For us, luckily, we have this kind of classical machine learning model at the end of the day that we can throw in a metric, and we can test on customer data, and then we can say, like, here's our analysis, do your own analysis, and then they kind of come back in a few days and say, yes, this checks out. But it's important to kind of optimize this time to value metric in order to be able to kind of represent the value of your product better. And sometimes that means you need to go back to the drawing board and see what segment of the market you address, and try to see if it's easier to sell, or you can find a customer segment that can kind of accelerate your traction, that requires kind of a few more things that you need to build on your side more than anything.
Right. So you sign a customer up, and you have a model that you're deploying, but the game is on to deliver as quickly as possible, right?
Right.
So what are the strategies or tactics, or what do you do to minimize this time to value effectively, while maintaining a certain level of quality of customer experience, quality, or just even just generic product?
We looked at the core product and said, like, what can we do? What product can we build? And what do we need to do in order to make kind of this time between kind of first day in which you started the integration all the way to seeing value? And kind of we broke it up into what we've seen customers do. So there's kind of an integration phase where they need to integrate the SDKs, and then there's some sort of data collection phase, and then there's some sort of analysis phase where they've collected some data, and like, we either need to build a model, or they build the model, and kind of they need to evaluate it. So we try to kind of build product at every step of the way in order to reduce this time to value. So an example would be, at the beginning, the SDK, for example, like, you would have to integrate it, would take you maybe a week. Can we make the SDK work in such a way that you just write 5 lines of code, and then it automatically collects when it needs to collect information, and you don't have to kind of actually build it in the product surfaces that you need to build? So I think we addressed it a lot through building product. Kind of try to be smart about this kind of integration points, and try to kind of bridge this through actually kind of addressing it like front and center. Sometimes you cannot always do this because it's not right in your control. So if there is any sort of step that happens on the customer side, then you need to bridge this with customer success resources. But even in that step, like, you need to provide resources, kind of build some sort of sales collateral maybe, or some sort of kind of data science material that they can use internally, and you still can guide the conversation in such a way that they understand better what they need to do on their own. And I think this is always a hard thing to manage from outside, even through customer success, is because you don't know exactly how the organization is set up, how many resources they have. So there's to some extent another part to this, which is part of the sales cycle. So whenever you start engaging with a prospect, you need to make sure that they're set up in a way in which they can kind of get to the value of your product in the fastest time possible. So while having the kind of the best product and the product set up in a way that can be fast to adopt, it's equally important to make sure that you're selling to the customers that are well set up to take this in and kind of get to the most value. Because otherwise, you can spend, and I think we've done this in the early days where um, we had customers spend months and months and months trying to kind of figure out what's happening. But it was a thing on their end where they weren't set up in such a way that they can easily kind of take in this data and kind of go through the motion of seeing the value. So once we've adjusted that ICP, and then we started kind of focusing and we started doing a lot more qualification early on, then we started kind of seeing kind of more customers kind of be prepared to address these things.
You're basically talking about education, or at least part of this was customer
Yeah.
education, right?
Yeah. Well,
Is there
I
anything
think
you do specifically in that sense?
it's more I think building the qualification process of how we go to market.
Okay.
It's less just pure education. I think we've tried to stay away from market education to some extent. I don't think it's possible always, but
Well, it's expensive, and you don't
exactly,
want
it's
to be
expensive.
too liberal giving it away because you're
Right.
just educating a market that, customers that
Yeah.
might not end up being yours.
Well, yeah, exactly, and it's expensive. It takes time, and if especially for venture backed businesses as we are, um, you have only so much time in which you can deploy the capital that you raised in order to show traction. So market education can take years. It's something that you need to do. You're playing the long game in the same time, but if you can find a market that you can address that this has already happened, and I think in the space of behavioral, to some extent that happened. I think that's best. Now, um, I think we do have some sort of market education problem in front of us. Like behavioral is still in the early adoption cycles right now. So we're seeing kind of banks adopt this more. We're seeing kind of large fintechs adopt this more. It's still hard to adopt by smaller customers. So there's still some segment of that, but for us, it was more important to make sure that, do you have data science resources? How large is the data science team? Is the data science team doing fraud, or is it a generic data science team that does anything and everything for the business? So if we answer all of these questions up front, then I think whenever we start kind of approaching those customers, we have a better idea around what we can expect. And this is basically part of the, and at the first meeting we have with any prospect, we go and ask these things and say, hey, like, can we talk with your manager for data science? Can we talk with the I don't know, VP of fraud? Like, ideally, this is the person that we reach out to. And whenever we get to that meeting with them, we have a script and we go through this and make sure that we try to do kind of more qualification past kind of the initial discovery phase.
Right. So in that conversation, you try and work out what they have, and map it against your template, as it were.
Right.
And then the education element is making sure that they understand what your process is going to be. And so you start setting their expectations.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
start building a customer journey for them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's kind of the magic of the sales process is that you always need to do this. Like you need to make sure that people see value in a structured way, and the definition of value is the same for both them and you. And I think this is what I learned from our head of sales, is that kind of the best way to articulate this at the end of the sales cycle, where they need to make a decision, is you actually put together a kind of a value proposition deck. And then in that value proposition deck, you analyze basically the scenario in which they go with your product, and what are the benefits, and what are the kind of the difficulties of adopting. and then you analyze a case in which they don't do anything, and you say, well, if you guys continue with the current way that you're doing, these are the kind of the pros and cons about it. And if you can get to a very crisp articulation of that, I think it's going to be very easy for kind of the final decision maker, the person that owns the budget, to really make a decision around, like, hey, are we going to spend, I don't know, X amount of dollars on this, or is it something that is not worth doing now? So I think the way it's very important to articulate value, and how the customer should see value early on, and try to always kind of nudge them into something that is very close to your definition. And if that definition that you come up with is actually the same definition of a lot of customers, then I think this is when you actually see product market fit. Um, yeah.
Right. So people who understand the problem in the same way, look at the solution in a similar way, and have similar expectations about what can be done.
Right. Right.
When you start working with customers, while you're working with them, do you collect feedback? I mean, I suppose you do collect feedback. So what do you do with it? Do you iterate based on their feedback? Would you say that links in with the idea of time to value?
Right. Right. Yeah, for sure. I think we try to build kind of a very strong bridge in between kind of the go to market side of the company. We're still small. We're 8 people, so um, I think we have a lot of communication in between the team. The team is remote, so it's not like the engineer kind of hears the discussion from the salesperson sitting next to them. But I think we've tried to build a strong bridge of collecting feedback and collecting kind of any sort of evidence and any sort of concerns about kind of the space, and relay that back to kind of the product and engineering team. In right now, kind of how we've set up this is that we have, so on the go to market side, we have a SDR, a sales development representative, that they do most of the outreach. So they basically kind of either through LinkedIn or email or cold calling, they kind of reach out to various prospects, and we have kind of a number of campaigns that we kind of address various segments of the market. And then we have a head of sales, which kind of, once we get to a meeting, that's when they start taking over the sales process. So I think both in the outreach phase and in the first few meetings, you can gather a lot of feedback around what people are using right now, or um, how they're thinking about the space initially, right? And then that, I think, informs kind of the shape and size of the product, or what we're trying to sell to them at the end of the day. And I think, for example, at some point we had to come up with a set of signals that we wanted to implement in order to give kind of more value to more customers. So an example of a signal can be, are you a fast typer? Like, if you type really fast, to the point in which it's abnormal for a human to type that fast, then probably it's a bot, right? Or is your device remotely controlled? I think this is quite a popular one. I think the world right now sees a lot of scams, and these scams usually happen through either, like, you're on the phone with someone and someone is guiding you to do things, or if you're, let's say, on an Android device or a Windows box, they can install some sort of remotely controlled software, and then they can do kind of a lot of damage through that. So having a signal that kind of gives you a probability of, like, hey, is this device remote controlled, is quite valuable for detecting fraud. But when it came to coming up with this set of signals, like, what are the first signals that we need to implement? What are the things that we can go to market with very fast, right after we have them ready? Was all feedback that we gathered through both kind of the experience we had doing outreach, and kind of through the first meetings of the sales cycle. If a lot of people mention this and they say, "Hey, do you guys have remote control detection?" then that's very important information that we need to relay back to the product team, and we need to start thinking about it. So we yeah, what we do is kind of we build this communication bridge where we try to document these types of things, and we also have sessions of kind of knowledge sharing in between the go to market team and the rest of the product engineering team. um, and we do this periodically, especially whenever we do offsites and stuff like that. That's something that we always try to do.
It's almost like you read my mind. I was wondering about, how you prioritize which features and aspects you
Yeah, well,
focus on based on feedback.
it's a good question, and I think this goes back to kind of your point around how experience in larger tech organization helps out. Is that turns out that as an engineering manager, you need to do a lot of prioritization. So um, it's a skill set that you kind of build over time. But I think what we do is we try to kind of create. We go through a portfolio approach to this. So we try to say, okay, like we need to. It's like managing your investment portfolio. You need to have a number of bets, right? So we try to come up with the things that we need to make some progress on, and it's always customer success is one of the most important kind of categories, especially for early stage. We're a kind of a seed stage startup. Very important for us to show as much traction as we can. So whenever we actually get to have a customer, we need to make sure that they're very very happy. There's quite a lot of value for us to do that. So customer success is kind of one of these big buckets in which we need to try to prioritize. Then we have this bucket of like strategic bets, in which we need to make sure that kind of for the long term we're doing the right thing for our kind of current and future customers. And then we need to make sure that there's another bucket in which we say, I don't know, like tech debt or any sort of things that we need to do that are kind of the cost of doing business. So we look at these three categories and say, okay, like how, like this quarter, this month, this week, how do we want to spend our time on? And um, sometimes we have, I know, like some customers is seeing some problem, and then we need to prioritize customer success more for the week. Sometimes we need to prioritize bigger bets, and I think this is where kind of feedback from GTM is important. Sometimes we need to prioritize I know, like the things that are kind of falling apart because we kind of got more traffic, and then kind of we need to pay down some tech debt and do that. But in general, I think customer success and strategic bets are the kind of the big buckets in which we try to prioritize. And we usually prioritize through kind of this lens of what can we do to improve our growth trajectory. So I think that's an important thing for us. Like the kind of the venture backed world, you always have like some sort of next set of milestones that you need to reach. And I think this is to some extent maybe the kind of the beauty of it, is that you always kind of have a very clear, I don't know, kind of goalpost or I don't know, like a bar that you need to pass. So like your seed, you need to get to, I know, classical enterprise SaaS is 1 million in ARR in order to kind of be able to access a Series A, right? And then like that's the North Star, and that's something that you're trying to optimize towards. And I think improving that trajectory and improving like how fast you're adding customers is an important part. And I think that's kind of always the North Star when it comes to this. And I think that usually means that strategic bets and anything you need to do in order to increase that growth trajectory is what you're trying to focus your efforts on.
What would be some typical challenges, obstacles on that path, and how did you overcome them? And maybe with a focus going back to time to value,
Yeah.
which clearly is supports positive customer experience and your growth path, right? Of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, and I think the biggest chunk of why, especially for us, time to value is important is because like a shorter time to value usually means a shorter sales cycle. A shorter sales cycle means that within a certain amount of time that you have left in terms of runway, you can acquire more customers, right? So I think that at the end of the day, kind of the math works that way, and that's why time to value is important. It also depends on the kind of segment of customers that you try to address. Like in the large enterprise, there's always, like, you cannot go under a certain amount of time that you need to spend in the sales cycle. They just move slower, and it is what it is. But if you can accelerate that, the more the better. So kind of, what are some challenges in this? Well, I think the main challenge is not always obvious what you need to optimize when it comes to this. Right? It's not obvious that, for example, when you start, the data science team needs to be well resourced to be able to do this. So I think there is a challenge in this space, is that you need to kind of really listen to what your customers are saying, and it is a challenge to kind of transfer that back into some very clear outcomes that you need to drive towards. So
Right.
um,
They know what their problem is to some extent, but they don't know how to translate it and
right,
what the solution is. And you're trying to bring that, yeah.
and you're trying to, like, you can only learn this by doing. And I think like, if you're trying to, I know, let's say you're very very early on, you're trying to kind of make a informed claim about how you're going to sell, or how you're going to approach the market. You don't know what you don't know, right? Like, you don't know that the data science teams are so um kind of diverse in terms of the work they do. So sometimes data science teams, they, like, for the really large customers, have a data science function that works on fraud. Sometimes they don't. At that point, it's quite challenging to do anything meaningful with them. So um, it takes some doing in order to integrate this back. So I think in general, and I think this is in general a really important point. Um, you're trying to, especially in the early stage, maximize the amount of learning that you do per kind of dollar spent. So you're trying to kind of invest as less resources, and to maximize your learning as much as you can. So um, I think this is why kind of doing outreach, and just trying to talk to kind of your customers without trying to sell to them anything, just learning from them, and listening them out, and having a sample size big enough is really important, especially early on. I think there is never kind of enough customer interviews that you can do early on. As more as you can gather in terms of feedback, and kind of a diverse set of opinions in this space, the better. And I think this kind of, the pitfall is that it takes time, you're trying to always look at this with an eye to kind of close this loop down, and make this learning faster. So usually what helps a lot here, and I think this is something that we don't necessarily have as much as, um, well, early on nowadays we've built it, is this concept of kind of founder market fit. Right? So like, you need to make sure that kind of the founding team, and if the founding team doesn't have this talent, you need to bring it on, or very early, people that have done this before, and instead of having spent kind of your own money that you raised to do these learnings, it's more useful to try to hire, kind of bring this talent on, and kind of bring the knowledge and the domain expertise early on, so that it complements what the founders bring. And I think this kind of helps you answer some of these questions around kind of learning the market, and learning kind of what are some of the pitfalls when it comes to this. So that's one side to it, is making sure that you don't spend too much time learning the market on your own budget, let's say. In There's kind of various ways that can be creative. You can hire, you can find contractors, you can find advisors, there's quite a lot of things you can do in this space.
Or
um
angels,
or angel.
as advisors. Yeah.
Yeah. um let's see, what are some other pitfalls in this space. um Yeah, I think it's in general, kind of coming back to the main point. It is like you need to be doing this, and you need to kind of always have a few things you need to try out, and kind of try to learn fast, and trying to adapt to these things. And um, you need to create some space for failure to some extent. Like
Yeah.
you don't have a lot of time to fail, but like you need to create, like you need to give yourself kind of a few shots to get this right. If you just have one, it's a bit, I think the risk of failure is too high, so you need to give yourself some time to try things out.
The way you describe this process is that it seems very kind of human centric and therefore time consuming, like you said. But are there any analytical, quantitative components to it? Is there anything you track, analyze as part of customer onboarding adoption process? Maybe there are, that way you identify bottlenecks or
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
areas for
So
improvement.
I think in our case, like the way in which customers interact with our platform, they don't necessarily, like, we do have some sort of management console, we do have some sort of kind of onboarding experience, but most of our customers come through kind of direct outreach. So to some extent, the most of the learnings and the kind of the things we can quantify are more from the go to market side than from kind of a pure onboarding flow experience, that you can add some metrics and kind of track down some KPIs that you can optimize. So for us, I think most of the learnings are from kind of going through the outreach that we've done, through kind of trying to learn from that experience, and kind of maybe listen in on some of the outreach calls, and see what people say, and try to make sure that kind of the person doing outreach kind of always captures this information, and tries to quantify it in some sort of fashion. So I think there's more stuff you can do there. That's just the nature of how we operate right now. I think to some extent it would be nicer and easier if we had kind of more organic traffic, right, and more organic adoption. But it is a very technical product, and you cannot really expect people to kind of hop on the website, click get started now for a fraud and risk solution. There's so much they need to do in order to jump in before they make that
Integrate.
decision, that it's hard to expect that for too many companies.
And once they are part of once you start dancing, because it might be that they start using the product, or they have a demo, or maybe even before that, what does it take for customers to realize value, the thing that you try to describe to them?
Yeah, well, for us, and I think this is not, I don't think we really nail this right now. I think this is still something that we're actively working towards. Value is, so the question was, they can see value. So I think value at first for us, for example, is just getting access to data. So like going from, I don't know what my users do from a behavioral point of view, to here's the data, here's how a fraudulent session, for example, really happened, where maybe they didn't move the cursor, maybe kind of they were filling out the sign up information for this bank, and the way in which they were doing this was not in a linear fashion where they were filling each field at a time. They were kind of switching windows quite a lot. They were doing copy paste, and they were filling in the fields in a very kind of random or chaotic fashion. They were trying various data through copy paste from different windows. So kind of just giving visibility to the customer is kind of a first step. So they haven't taken any sort of kind of decision to block this fraudulent user. Like kind of post fraud happening, they can better analyze, and their um, analysts better understand what's happening. So that would be kind of a first pass at value. That being said, this is not very useful, right? Like it's still it's interesting. It gives you some glimpse into it, but kind of the interesting thing about the fraud space is that like for them, value is kind of the math for a business that sees fraud is the following. Like you will always have a fraud rate. Like you will always have a percentage of your revenue that kind of the fraudsters somehow, somewhere, somewhat they get to. As you grow, maybe it's more important for you to grow than necessarily kind of care about it. If it is a small percentage, you can kind of pass it on as cost of doing business, right? So, like I have a I know 0.3% cost of growing, and it's a business decision around where that threshold is. Um, at some point, you realize that out of your whole revenue, that fraud rate, you can actually invest in buying fraud software and lower that by some amount, right? So you can say, well, if that 0.3% or whatever is, I don't know, like 30 million a year, can I spend 5 million in order to reduce it by half? And at that point you kind of get enough information to hone in around how much can you spend on vendors. So for our product to show value, it needs to show value in a way that it reduces fraud by like a certain amount, that it offsets kind of the amount of fraud that that the business kind of sees, right? So that math needs to work out. Now that's one side of it. Another side to it is just compliance risk, right? So if you do enough like money laundering through your platform, like the government is going to come at you. So there's quite a lot of regulation in this space, and you need to do a number of things in order to try to stop any sort of money laundering. So at that point, you never know where these things happen. So you need to kind of invest. It's kind of buying insurance. You need to invest a certain amount so that like in case of something happens, like you have your bases covered. So that's another way in which the other side of the business, the kind of the customer, kind of looks at this. So for them, for us is try to kind of um, play a part in this way in which they think about reducing fraud. Can our solution reduce enough fraud so that it offsets the cost of it? That's also how it helps to price it down for us, and think about where do we need to be in terms of pricing. But it also kind of speaks about value, right? Like they need to see like a lot of value out of this in order to kind of make that buy decision. So um, we look, when it comes to the metrics that we look in terms of value, is we try to kind of sprinkle value as you do more work to integrate our product. So kind of the way that we talk about it is we say you can get the like as more you put into this data and into this kind of effort to fight fraud with behavioral, as much as you can get out. So there's a kind of a spectrum of things that you can do. Like you can just use this data to give it to your analysts so that they can better look at these fraud cases. You can start consuming signals. You can start kind of doing your own data science and build your own signals. And then kind of you can say, hey, Munson, just go and kind of build models for us. And then like you get the a final decision around fraud that we together with your team we can define together. So there's a spectrum of value, and it really depends around where the customer sits on this spectrum and on what they're looking for when it comes to this. So I think for us, the largest customers, they just want data. The smaller customers, they want kind of the whole thing, like as much as they can get through working with us. So it's quite a spectrum, and there's quite a lot of points where you can articulate value based on where they're at.
Right. I can imagine that some of the largest customers have a pretty good idea of what types of fraud there are and
For sure.
all the detailed cases that there might be. So they're looking for ways to combat all of them or as many of them as possible. But smaller customers might not have even considered some of the things that you know how to address.
Right.
This is, of course, I was tempted to ask more questions about how do people do fraud, because you described one or two things, and it really tickles curiosity, but I don't think it's a particularly good idea to preach it.
Well, it's the interesting thing about fraud is that you don't necessarily need to be the most sophisticated player in the world to stop it. You just need to be more sophisticated than your counterparts. It's like that thing when you're chased by a bear, you don't need to run the fastest. You just not need to be faster than the slowest one. So with fraud is a similar thing. So there will always be, and there's always fraudsters trying to find a breach where they can exploit, and then they'll post it on Reddit and ask $200 for it, and and all of a sudden, like the whole world is trying to defraud you through that thing. So yeah, like fraud can happen, and there's kind of multiple typologies of fraud. There's something called new account fraud, where people are trying to kind of create a new account for a bank, for example, or any sort of financial institution, and they maybe stitch together a synthetic identity where it's made out of different chunks of believable data, but it's not necessarily a full stolen identity. It's kind of my email, your name, someone else's social security number, stuff like that. There's account takeover, so like people just try to guess your password, try to kind of get in and log in as you. There's transaction fraud, so like people try to kind of go through a transaction flow. At the end of it, they do fraud. There's a really hard one to catch, which is called friendly fraud. So this happens especially in the crypto space, where you go and I don't know, buy a crypto asset, and then you say go to your credit card and do a chargeback and say, yeah, it wasn't me. Like, I don't know who bought this. The fraudsters bought this for me. And that's really hard to catch, right? Like, you haven't interacted with that customer before. It, like, how can you prove that you had kind of this buyer's remorse? And this can happen in various ways. Like, for example, maybe your kid found your phone and bought something off Amazon, and then you did a chargeback and said, no, like, this wasn't me, it was a fraudster, and in fact it was my kid. Or like there's various aspects of this. So like the space of fraud is it's very interesting. There's always kind of this kind of cat and mouse game where you need to adapt fast, and as I mentioned, like the fraudsters would find a hole, they'll exploit it, and you will see a lot of volume very fast if it works, if the hold remains unpatched. So to some extent, the challenge is also that you need to move fast. It's not just kind of trying to be proactive. Like once fraud is happening through a new vector, how can you stop that as soon as possible? So yeah, and I think behavioral is kind of one of these technologies that you basically can use to kind of get ahead of this to some extent. It turns out that it's really hard to fake behavior. um, like if you do any sort of automated attacks, they all kind of leave traces. Um, so I think automation is somewhat easy to catch with behavioral, and things like friendly fraud are hard to catch anyhow. And for example, with behavioral, if you've seen that customer before, you can build some sort of kind of behavioral profile for that customer. And if I know that I know, like, you, Ciprian, always behave this way on this device and this way, and then all of a sudden it was your behavioral profile and now it's a chargeback, then maybe something is off, and I can debate that, and I can defend that with some proof. So yeah, these things are still that's in general how fraud happens.
Right.
Yeah.
But before I ask you for a sort of quick wrap up of the main idea, going back to time to value, maybe a point of reflection. It occurred to me while you were talking just a minute ago that maybe fraudsters could use AI that impersonates humans in a much more believable way, right? So that's gonna be a challenge, probably.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. And I think we're still early in this cycle. But I think definitely, especially for example in the KYC space, where someone needs to check an ID for a person. I bet that through kind of the modern AI approaches to things, um, you can fake an ID in a way easier fashion than ever before, especially
Right.
on a webcam or something like that. So yeah, I think there's definitely this new wave of attack vectors that are coming. I think we're gonna see a lot of new ways in which this is gonna play out. I think in the same time, especially when it comes to account takeover, the platforms itself are starting to play a bigger role. So we have things like passkeys, and like the modern mobile devices have various ways to manage keys and like cryptographic keys in your device, and going to be able to prove cryptographically that, like, hey, is Bogdan really Bogdan? Yes, because it has my digital signature and so on. So I think there's also kind of this other
Right.
wave of things that are really starting to come out from the platform owners, from basically Google and Apple at this point. And I think there's quite a lot of excitement to try the new AI approaches to detecting fraud. So kind of the transformer based machine learned models that we're seeing nowadays, and large language models can be adapted to kind of a new model architecture to catch fraud. And if you have enough data to feed to them, you can probably get a lot of great results and interesting results out of that. So yeah, I think there's quite a lot of excitement throughout the the field. I bet both on the fraudster side and on the fraud catching side. I think this game of cat and mouse is just going to become a lot more interesting over the next few years.
Which of course makes it all the more interesting and relevant for you when addressing new potential customers. Well, maybe I shouldn't try and wrap it up myself. How would you wrap up the concept of time to value? And what is
Yeah.
like the most important thing that a startup, an entrepreneur should be building in order to address this and to minimize time to value
Yeah.
for their customers?
I think it needs to start with awareness about it. I think you need to be aware of the fact that there is always some amount of time in which when you sell into a customer, or when a customer even kind of puts in a credit card on your website and starts using your product, up until they have that wow moment in which they definitely see value. I would say tracking that in a some sort of analytical fashion, if possible, is really important. And I think it boils down to kind of the core skill sets that are required to build good product. I think talking to your customers, understanding the customer need, making sure that you're addressing something that is of value to them. And I think whenever you don't have that information, it's deeply important to be able to spend to spend as much time understanding these things, and try to bridge that with, if you don't have it on the team, try to hire, try to contract out, try to find advisors, angels, people that can help out with this. Because it is, while it's important to spend time to understand the market, and there's a lot of examples out there of startups that took years and years and years up until they found the right product for the right market segment. um, I don't think everybody has that luxury. Not everybody has the capital, or
Yeah.
has like enough runway to manage these things. And I think try to accelerate that learning, and try to maximize that kind of learning per dollar um, is really important. And I think there's quite a lot of creative ways to kind of learn about, and try to learn about your customers, and kind of in various ways. And I think that boils down to a product that can be adopted as easily as possible. And I know that in the enterprise space, there is no free lunch here. There's always like some amount of time, and some amount of education, and some amount of customer success that you need to do. But even in that space, there's so much potential to create products that are way easier to use, way easier to integrate, given let's say complex markets like fraud and risk. Like fraud and risk is it's not necessarily a easy space to be in. There's quite a lot of moving parts. I think there's still a lot of space to innovate here, and kind of make a big dent.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you very much for sharing your experience, for your time, and kind of implicit advice that you give people. You gave people today, and I know that generally as well. Even if simply through sharing experience and explaining how you do it
Yeah.
within a given context or concept. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Great listening to you, and look forward to next time.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Ciprian. And yeah, great kind of connecting and talking to the Grow Channel audience. So thank you so much for the invitation.
Cheers.